Vincent Torrino had perfected the art of being invisible in plain sight. At 52, he ran a successful accounting firm in suburban Denver, drove a sensible Honda Accord, and coached Little League on weekends. His neighbors knew him as the quiet guy who shoveled their driveways without being asked and never missed a PTA meeting. His wife Maria thought his reluctance to talk about his childhood in Boston was just typical male emotional distance. His teenage daughter Sophie rolled her eyes when he deflected questions about his family history with jokes about being boring. His son Marcus had long ago stopped asking why Grandpa and Grandma never visited, why there were no old photo albums, why Dad's accent sometimes slipped when he was tired. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They had built their assumptions around his silence, filling in the gaps with ordinary explanations. But on a quiet Tuesday evening in March, as the family gathered around their dinner table, the local news would shatter 23 years of carefully constructed normalcy with 6 words that changed everything. The Battaglia crime family trial begins. The remote control trembled in Maria's hand as she raised the volume, drawn by the familiar cadence of a name that sounded almost like her husband's. Vincent's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, the piece of meatloaf growing cold, as his dark eyes fixed on the screen with an intensity his family had never seen before. The reporter stood outside the federal courthouse in Boston, her voice crisp against the backdrop of concrete and steel that Vincent recognized like a scar he'd tried to forget. After 8 years of investigation, federal prosecutors are finally bringing members of the notorious Battaglia organization to trial. The charges include racketeering, money laundering, witness intimidation, and 3 counts of murder. At the center of this case is testimony from a protected witness known only as Subject 17, whose identity remains sealed by court order. Sophie looked up from her phone, suddenly interested in something that wasn't social media. "Dad, isn't that where you grew up? Boston?" She studied his face, noting how the color had drained from his olive complexion, how his hands had gone completely still. Marcus paused his endless fidgeting with his napkin, sensing something electric in the room's atmosphere. Vincent's throat felt like sandpaper. For over 2 decades, he had rehearsed this moment in his mind, imagining different scenarios, different reactions. But now that it was here, all his prepared explanations crumbled like ash. "Yes, sweetheart, a long time ago." His voice came out rougher than intended, carrying an edge his family had never heard before. Maria muted the television, but kept her eyes on the screen where file photos of stern-faced men in expensive suits flashed in sequence. "You never really talk about growing up there. Did you know any of these people?" Her question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications none of them were ready to confront. The photographs continued cycling on the screen, and Vincent recognized every face with crystalline clarity. Tommy, the fish Marconi, who used to bring him comic books when he was 8 years old. Sal Benedetto, who taught him how to throw a curveball in the parking lot behind Gino's restaurant. Frank Torrino, his own father, whose stern face stared back from the television with the same dark eyes that Vincent saw in the mirror every morning. The man he had spent half his life trying not to become, whose legacy he had buried so deep that sometimes he almost believed his own cover story. "I might have seen some of them around the neighborhood," Vincent said carefully, each word measured like ingredients in a recipe that could poison everything if mixed wrong. "Boston's not that big a place. People know people." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like breaking glass. "I should get some work done. Johnson's quarterly taxes won't file themselves." But Marcus, 16 and too observant for his own good, had noticed something in his father's reaction that didn't match his casual dismissal. "Dad, wait, that guy in the middle, the one they keep showing, he looks exactly like you." His voice carried the accusatory tone that teenagers had perfected, the one that demanded truth, even when truth was dangerous. Vincent turned back, and for a moment, his family saw something flicker across his features, a shadow of someone they had never met, someone harder, Someone who had learned to survive in a world where the wrong word could mean the difference between waking up tomorrow or disappearing forever. A lot of Italian guys look alike, Marcus. It's not exactly uncommon. Maria studied her husband's face with the careful attention she usually reserved for reading contracts at the law firm where she worked as a paralegal. 25 years of marriage had taught her to recognize when Vincent was holding something back. But this felt different, deeper, more dangerous. Honey, maybe we should talk about this. The kids are old enough to understand if there's something in your past that you're not comfortable sharing. The kindness in her voice almost broke him. Maria deserved better than half-truths and carefully constructed lies. She deserved a husband who could tell her about his first pet, his favorite teacher, the street where he learned to ride a bicycle. Instead, she had married a ghost, a man who had erased his own history so thoroughly that sometimes he wondered if Vincent Torrino, the accountant, was real, and Vincent Torrino, the son of a mob underboss, was the fabrication. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, but his voice betrayed him with the slightest tremor. "I came to Denver for college, met you, never looked back. Sometimes the past is past for a reason." He walked toward his home office, each step feeling like he was walking away from everything he had built, everything he loved. Behind him, the television continued its relentless broadcast, and he could hear the reporter's voice following him down the hallway like a pursuing shadow. The Battaglia organization, also known as the North End Crew, controlled illegal gambling, loan sharking, and protection rackets throughout Boston for over 30 years. Federal prosecutors allege that the organization used violence and intimidation to maintain control of their territory, with several high-profile murders attributed to the group's enforcement activities. Vincent closed his office door and leaned against it, his hands shaking as he pulled out the secure phone he had kept hidden in his desk drawer for over 2 decades, a phone that had never rung, that he had hoped would never need to ring. The number he dialed was burned into his memory like a brand, and it was answered before the first ring finished. "We've been expecting your call," the voice on the other end said without preamble. Agent Sarah Chen had been his handler in the Witness Protection Program since 1999, the woman who had helped him disappear completely and reappear as someone else entirely. Her tone carried the weight of inevitability, the sound of chickens coming home to roost. "How bad is it?" Vincent asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Bad enough that your father's attorney has been asking questions about Subject 17's current whereabouts? Bad enough that Tommy Marconi made bail yesterday and immediately started making phone calls to people in Colorado? Bad enough that you might want to consider relocating your family before the weekend." Chen's words hit him like physical blows, each one dismantling another piece of the life he had built, everything he had built. Vincent sank into his desk chair, surrounded by the ordinary debris of a suburban accountant's life. Tax forms and client files, a photo of Sophie at last year's science fair, a coffee mug that said "world's most boring dad" that Marcus had given him for Father's Day. All of it real, all of it precious, all of it about to disappear. "I can't run again. My wife has..."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Career here. My kids have friends, school, their whole lives. I won't do that to them." "Vincent, you testified against some very dangerous people. People who don't forget and don't forgive. The trial is going to last months, and every day it continues is another day your cover gets thinner. Your father isn't stupid. He knows exactly who Subject 17 is, and he's going to do everything in his power to make sure you don't make it to the witness stand." Through his office window, Vincent could see Maria in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher with the same methodical efficiency she brought to everything in their lives. Sophie was at the kitchen table, supposedly doing homework, but actually texting friends. Marcus had wandered into the living room and was still watching the news, his teenage curiosity piqued by his father's strange reaction. They looked so normal, so beautifully ordinary, so completely unprepared for the storm that was about to engulf them.
"I need time," Vincent said. "Give me 48 hours to figure out how to tell them." "You have 24, Chen replied. "After that, I'm pulling you all out whether they understand or not. And Vincent, start thinking about how you're going to explain why you never told your wife that you witnessed 3 murders and testified against your own father to put him away for life. Because that conversation is going to happen a lot sooner than you think." The line went dead, and Vincent stared at the phone in his hand as if it were a weapon that had just misfired. 24 hours to find words that could explain 23 years of deception. 24 hours to prepare the people he loved most for the possibility that everything they thought they knew about him was a lie constructed to keep them safe. 24 hours to figure out how to tell his teenage children that their grandfather wasn't dead, as he had always told them, but sitting in a federal courthouse plotting his son's murder. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder that he had hoped never to touch again. Inside were documents that told the real story of Vincent Torrino, the story he had buried so deep that sometimes he forgot it existed. Birth certificate from Boston City Hospital, high school transcript from St. Anthony's Preparatory, and underneath everything else, a photograph that made his chest tighten with memory and regret. It showed a 17-year-old version of himself standing next to Frank Torrino outside Gino's restaurant on a summer evening in 1987. His father's arm was around his shoulders, both of them smiling at whoever was taking the picture. Vincent remembered that night with painful clarity. It was 3 days before he witnessed Tommy Marconi and Sal Benedetto execute a rival crew member in the restaurant's back room. 3 days before his entire world shifted on its axis, and he realized that the father that he had idolized was a man who ordered deaths the way other people ordered coffee. The photograph represented everything he had tried to leave behind, but looking at it now, he could see his own features reflected in his father's face. The same dark eyes that Marcus had inherited, the same stubborn jawline that Sophie had gotten from her grandfather she had never met. Genetics were a stubborn thing, and now those family resemblances were threatening to unravel everything. Vincent slipped the photograph back into the folder and locked the drawer, but he knew it was too late for such precautions. The truth was already spreading through his house like smoke, invisible but impossible to ignore. Maria's questions would get sharper. Marcus's teenage detective instincts would kick into overdrive. Sophie would start Googling names and dates, connecting dots that he had spent decades keeping separate. In the kitchen, he could hear the familiar sounds of his family's evening routine. Maria running water for tea, Sophie arguing with someone on her phone about homework, Marcus channel surfing with the remote. Normal sounds of a normal life that was about to become anything but. He had given them 23 years of safety, 23 years of
Boring suburban predictability. And now it was all going to end because a federal prosecutor in Boston had decided it was time for justice to be served. Vincent stood up and walked to his office window, looking out at the quiet street where he had taught both his children to ride bicycles, where he had helped neighbors jumpstart cars and organize block parties. Mrs. Henderson was walking her ancient golden retriever past their front yard. The Patels were bringing in their garbage cans from the curb. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning, but Vincent knew that appearances could be devastatingly deceptive. By tomorrow night, federal marshals would probably be parked in unmarked cars along this same street, and his neighbors would be watching the evening news with the uncomfortable fascination that comes from realizing that danger had been living right next door all along. He thought about the promises he had made to Maria on their wedding day, about being honest and trustworthy, about sharing everything with her. He thought about the bedtime stories he had told his children, making up adventures about a mythical uncle who traveled the world having exciting experiences, never mentioning that the most exciting experience of his own youth had been testifying in secret against men who had treated him like family. He thought about all the times Marcus had complained that his father was boring, never knowing that boring had been the goal, that ordinary had been the greatest achievement of Vincent's entire adult life. The secure phone buzzed in his hand, and Chen's number appeared on the display. He answered immediately, hoping for good news, but expecting the worst. "We've got a problem," Chen said without preamble. "Tommy Marconi didn't just make bail, he disappeared.
ditched his ankle monitor 6 hours ago and hasn't been seen since. Local PD found his car abandoned at Denver International Airport. Vincent's blood turned to ice. He's here. We have to assume so. I've got teams mobilizing, but Vincent, you need to get your family out of that house right now. Don't pack, don't explain, just get him in the car and drive to the nearest police station. We'll meet you there. Through the kitchen window, Vincent could see Maria pouring herself a cup of tea, completely oblivious to the fact that a man who had killed at least 6 people was potentially circling their neighborhood like a predator. Sophie was still at the kitchen table, her calculus homework spread out in front of her, earbuds in, lost in whatever music was helping her concentrate. Marcus had settled on a documentary about World War II, fascinated by history that he thought was safely contained in the past. I can't, Vincent said. Not yet. They don't know anything. If I drag them out of here without explanation, it'll traumatize them worse than the truth. Vincent, Tommy Marconi has been waiting 24 years for the chance to get revenge for your testimony. He's not going to hesitate just because your family is in the way. In fact, he's probably counting on using them as leverage. The weight of Chen's words settled on Vincent's shoulders like a lead blanket. Everything he had done, every lie he had told, every precaution he had taken had been designed to prevent exactly this moment. But prevention only worked until it didn't, and now all his careful construction was collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. Give me 30 minutes, Vincent said. 30 minutes to tell them enough of the truth that they'll come with me willingly. You have 20. And Vincent, when you tell them, remember that your wife is a paralegal. She's going to ask questions that you might not be ready to answer. Questions about why you never told her, about what else you might be hiding, about whether the man she married actually exists. Be prepared for that conversation to go badly. Vincent hung up the phone and stood in his office for a moment, surrounded by the artifacts of a life he was about to lose. His CPA certificates on the wall, the thank you cards from clients whose taxes he had navigated through
Audit, the Little League trophy from his coaching days. All of it about to become evidence in a story that would redefine everything his family thought they knew about him. He walked to the kitchen, where his family was scattered in their usual evening positions, each of them absorbed in their own version of normal. Maria looked up as he entered, and something in his expression made her set down her teacup with unusual care. We need to talk, Vincent said, his voice carrying a gravity that made Sophie pull out her earbuds and Marcus mute the television. All of us, right now. Maria studied his face with growing concern. Vincent, you're scaring me. What's wrong? He pulled out the 4th kitchen chair and sat down heavily, feeling every one of his 52 years settling into his bones like sediment. Remember how you asked if I knew those people on the news? The ones from Boston? Sophie leaned forward, her teenage instincts picking up on the tension in the room like a radar system designed to detect adult dysfunction. Dad, you're being weird. What's going on? Vincent looked at each of their faces, memorizing them as they were in this moment, before everything changed. Maria's intelligent brown eyes already calculating possibilities and outcomes. Sophie's dramatic flair temporarily suspended by genuine concern. Marcus's awkward teenage frame folded into his chair, trying to look nonchalant while hanging on every word. I didn't just know them, Vincent said quietly. One of them is my father. The silence that followed was so complete that Vincent could hear the refrigerator humming, the wall clock ticking, the sound of Mrs. Henderson's dog barking at something in the distance. Marcus's mouth fell open slightly. Sophie's eyes widened with the kind of shock that usually preceded either tears or shouting. Maria's face went through a series of micro-expressions, confusion giving way to disbelief, giving way to something that looked dangerously like betrayal. Your father is dead, Maria said slowly, as if testing the words to see if they still made sense. You told me your parents died in a car accident when you were 19. We've been married for 25 years, Vincent. I've comforted you on the anniversary of their deaths. Vincent's throat felt like he was swallowing broken glass. My mother did die in a car accident, but my father is Frank Torrino. He's the underboss of the Battaglia crime family, and 24 years ago I testified against him in federal court to put him in prison for the rest of his life. The kitchen erupted in chaos. Sophie started crying. Not the manipulative tears she'd deployed when she wanted something, but genuine sobs of confusion and fear. Marcus stood up so fast his chair tipped over, backing away from the table as if his father had suddenly become radioactive. Maria just stared, her paralegal training warring with 25 years of marriage, trying to process information that didn't fit into any category her mind had prepared for. "You're lying," Marcus said, his voice cracking with adolescent indignation. "You're lying because you don't want to talk about whatever stupid thing happened when you were a kid. Grandpa isn't in the mob. Grandpa is dead." Vincent pulled the manila folder from his jacket pocket and spread its contents across the kitchen table. Birth certificate, school records, and finally, the photograph of himself and Frank Torrino outside Gino's restaurant. The resemblance was unmistakable. Father and son sharing the same dark features, the same confident posture, the same smile that had charmed and terrified people throughout Boston's North End. Maria picked up the photograph with trembling fingers, studying it as if it might reveal some explanation that would make everything make sense again. "This is you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is definitely you, but who is this man? This isn't the father you described to me." "This is Frank the Hammer Torrino. He controlled gambling and loan sharking from Revere to Quincy. He ordered the deaths of at least 12 people that I know about. And when I was 17 years old, I watched 2 of his men execute someone in the back room of his restaurant because the guy had refused to pay protection money." Sophie's crying intensified, and she pushed away from the table as if the photograph might contaminate her. "You're saying our grandfather is a murderer? That we're related to criminals? What does that make us?" "It makes you exactly who you've always been," Vincent said desperately, reaching for his daughter's hand only to have her pull away. "It doesn't change anything about who you are or who your mother is. It only changes what you know about me." But Maria was studying the documents with the methodical attention she brought to legal research, and Vincent could see her putting together a timeline that filled him with dread. "Vincent, if you testified 24 years ago, that means you were in witness protection when we met, which means—" She looked up at him with eyes that had gone cold with understanding. "Which means you lied to me from the very first day we met. Every story about your childhood, every explanation about your family, every reason you gave for not having old friends or staying in touch with relatives, all of it was lies." Vincent felt like he was drowning in his own kitchen, surrounded by the people he loved most, watching them realize that the foundation of their entire life together had been built on deception. "I had to lie, Maria. They would have killed me if anyone knew where I was. They would have killed all of you just for being associated with me. So instead, you just let us live with a stranger for 25 years. Maria's voice was rising, her paralegal composure cracking like ice in spring. "You let me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist? You let me have children with a man whose real name I don't even know." "Vincent Torrino is my real name," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew how pathetic they sounded. "I never changed my identity completely. I just changed my history." Marcus was still standing by the overturned chair, his teenage brain struggling to process information that seemed to belong in a movie rather than his actual life. "So all those times I complained about you being boring, about us never having family reunions or visiting relatives, it was because you were hiding from the Mafia?" "I was hiding from my father and the men who worked for him," Vincent corrected. "Men who don't forgive and don't forget. Men who would see my wife and children as acceptable casualties in a war that started before you were born." The kitchen fell silent again, but this time the silence felt heavier, more permanent. Vincent could see his family retreating from him mentally, pulling back from the revelation that the man they had trusted completely had been keeping the most fundamental facts about himself secret for their entire relationship. Maria folded the photograph carefully and placed it back in the folder, her movements precise and controlled in the way that meant she was fighting very hard not to lose her temper completely. 25 years, Vincent. 25 years of marriage, and you never trusted me enough to tell me the truth about who you really are? I was protecting you, Vincent said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. If you had known, you would have been in danger too. Your ignorance was your safety. Don't you dare, Maria snapped, her professional demeanor finally cracking.
Don't you dare make this about protecting me. This is about you being too much of a coward to trust the woman you married with the truth about your life. This is about you making a unilateral decision to lie to me every single day for a quarter of a century." Sophie had stopped crying and was now staring at her father with an expression he had never seen before, something between fear and fascination. "Dad, if your father is in prison, why is this happening now? Why are they talking about him on TV?" Vincent felt his phone buzzing in his pocket, probably Chen calling to tell him his 20
minutes were up, but he ignored it. "Because I'm going to have to testify again. There's a new trial, and they need my testimony to make sure he stays in prison for the rest of his life." "And if you don't testify?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a maturity that reminded Vincent uncomfortably of himself at that age. "Then he gets out, and the first thing he does is come looking for me." The implications of that statement settled over the kitchen like fog, and Vincent watched his family realize that this wasn't just about past deceptions. This was about present danger, about the possibility that their quiet suburban life was about to be shattered by violence they had never imagined. Maria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with the same sound Vincent's had made earlier. "I need air. I need to think. I can't—" She gestured helplessly at the documents scattered across the table. "I can't process this right now." "Maria, wait!" Vincent called, but she was already walking toward the back door, grabbing her jacket from the hook without looking back. "Let her go, Dad," Sophie said quietly. Her tears had stopped, but her voice carried a weariness that seemed far too old for her 16 years. "She needs time to figure out if she can forgive you for this." "Can you?" Vincent asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Sophie looked at the photograph again, studying the face of the grandfather she had never known existed. "I don't know yet. But Dad, next time you decide to completely upend our entire understanding of reality, maybe give us a little more warning than 'we need to talk.'" Despite everything, Vincent almost smiled. His daughter's dramatic flair was intact, even in crisis. It was the first normal thing that had happened since the news broadcast began, and he clung to it like a life preserver. Marcus picked up his overturned chair and sat down heavily, his teenage awkwardness replaced by something that looked disturbingly like adult resignation. "So what happens now? Do we have to move? Change our names? What's the protocol for this kind of thing?" Vincent's phone had stopped buzzing, but he knew Chen would be calling back soon, probably with less patience and more urgency. "We might have to relocate temporarily until the trial is over and it's safe to come back." "What if it's never safe to come back?" Sophie asked. "What if this trial goes badly and your father gets out? What if his friends decide to come after us anyway? Are we supposed to spend the rest of our lives running from your mistakes?" The question hit Vincent like a physical blow, mainly because he didn't have a good answer. Everything depended on variables he couldn't control. The testimony of other witnesses, the skill of federal prosecutors, the decisions of 12 jurors who would never understand the full complexity of what they were judging. He had gambled his family's entire future on a justice system that was imperfect at best, and now they were all going to pay the price for his choice to tell the truth 24 years ago. "I don't know," he admitted. "I wish I could promise you that everything will go back to normal after the trial, but I can't. I can only promise that I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe." Marcus stood up again, but this time his movement was decisive rather than panicked. "I'm going to find Mom. She shouldn't be alone right now, even if she's mad at you." Vincent nodded gratefully. His son was handling this crisis with more maturity than he had any right to expect, and it made him proud and heartbroken in equal measure. "Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm sorry." "Tell her yourself when she's ready to hear it," Marcus replied. "But Dad, she's going to need time. This isn't the kind of thing you just apologize for and move on." After Marcus left, Vincent and Sophie sat in the kitchen surrounded by the debris of their normal life. The dinner plates were still on the table, Maria's tea growing cold in its cup, homework scattered across the counter like evidence of a more innocent time. Everything looked the same, but Vincent knew that nothing would ever be the same again.
"Sophie," he began, but she held up her hand to stop him. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. No more lies, no more protecting me from information you think I can't handle." Vincent nodded, though part of him dreaded what was coming. "When you testified against your father, did you know it would mean never seeing him again? Did you know it would mean lying to your future family for the rest of your life?" Vincent considered the question carefully, remembering the 17-year-old boy who had sat in a federal prosecutor's office, terrified and angry and desperate to do the right thing. "I knew I was choosing between being his son and being the kind of man I wanted to become.
I knew that choice would cost me everything I had ever known, but I didn't know it would cost me the ability to be completely honest with the people I would love most. Sophie absorbed this information with the same methodical attention her mother had shown, and Vincent realized that his daughter had inherited more than just Maria's intelligence. She had inherited her ability to see through complicated situations to their emotional core. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "If you could go back and make a different choice, would you?" The question was more complex than it appeared, layered with implications about loyalty and justice and the price of moral decisions. Vincent thought about the men his father had killed, about the families destroyed by his organization's activities, about the 17-year-old version of himself who had watched an execution and decided that blood wasn't thicker than conscience. "I regret that my choice hurt you, and your mother, and Marcus," he said slowly. "I regret that I had to lie to you for so many years. But I don't regret testifying against him. Some things are more important than family loyalty, Sophie. Some things are more important than keeping secrets." His daughter nodded, though she could see she was still processing everything, still trying to reconcile the father she had known with the stranger who had just been revealed to her. "I think I understand. But Dad, the next time you have to make a choice between protecting us and telling us the truth, I want you to trust us enough to let us help you decide." Vincent felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of fear and guilt that had been tightening for 24 years. His daughter was offering him something he didn't deserve: forgiveness, understanding, and the promise of a different kind of relationship built on honesty instead of protection. "I promise," he said, and meant it completely. His phone rang again, and this time he knew he couldn't ignore it. Chin's voice was tense with urgency when he answered. "Vincent, we've got multiple problems. Tommy Marconi's car was found at the airport, but airport security cameras show him getting into another vehicle. We don't know what he's driving or where he's headed, but we have to assume he's in your area. More importantly, we've intercepted communications suggesting that there are 2 other people looking for you, not just Tommy." Vincent felt his brief moment of peace with Sophie evaporate like morning mist. "Who else?" "Your father's current attorney, a woman named Catherine Romano, has been making inquiries about Subject 17's current location. But Vincent, she's not working alone. We think Frank has put together a team of people looking for you, and they're being more systematic than Tommy's revenge mission." Through the kitchen window, Vincent could see Marcus and Maria standing in the backyard, talking quietly near the garden shed. Maria's posture was stiff with anger and hurt, but she was listening to whatever Marcus was saying, which Vincent took as a positive sign. They looked so vulnerable out there, so exposed, so completely unprepared for the kind of danger that was apparently circling their neighborhood. "How long do I have?" "We're mobilizing extraction teams right now, but it's going to take at least 2 hours to get everyone in position. Vincent, you cannot stay in that house. Take your family and
Go somewhere public, somewhere with lots of people and security cameras. A mall, a restaurant, a police station. Anywhere but home." Vincent looked at Sophie, who was listening to his side of the conversation with growing alarm. Her brief moment of mature acceptance was giving way to teenage fear, and he could see her starting to realize that this wasn't just about family secrets anymore. This was about immediate, physical danger to everyone she loved. "Okay," Vincent said. "We'll leave in 10 minutes. "Make it 5, Chen replied. "And Vincent, when you get to wherever you're going, call me immediately. We need to coordinate your movements until we can get you into secure custody." Vincent hung up the phone and looked at his daughter, trying to figure out how to explain that their crisis was escalating from emotional to potentially deadly. "Sophie, we need to leave, right now." "Because of the men who are looking for you?" Vincent nodded. "Because staying here puts all of you in danger, and I've already put you in enough danger for one lifetime." Sophie stood up with the kind of determination that reminded Vincent of her mother, and for a moment he saw Maria's strength reflected in their daughter's face. "Then let's go get Mom and Marcus and figure out how to survive this together." As they walked toward the back door, Vincent realized that his daughter had just summarized what he should have been doing all along, facing danger together instead of trying to face it alone. It was a lesson that had taken him 24 years to learn, and he hoped it wasn't too late to put it into practice.
The parking lot of Northgate Mall buzzed with evening shoppers, teenagers hanging around the food court entrance, and families loading purchases into their cars. Vincent had chosen this location precisely because it represented everything normal about suburban life, the kind of place where violence seemed impossible and anonymity came naturally. He sat at a corner table in the food court, watching the entrances while Maria stared at her untouched coffee and the kids picked at French fries neither of them wanted. The silence between them felt like a living thing, fed by 25 years of trust that had been shattered in a single evening. Maria's wedding ring caught the fluorescent light as she turned it absently around her finger, a gesture Vincent recognized as her way of processing stress. Sophie kept glancing at other families, probably wondering if their fathers were also fugitives from organized crime. Marcus had positioned himself where he could see the entire food court, his teenage social awkwardness replaced by a hypervigilance that reminded Vincent uncomfortably of himself at that age. Vincent's secure phone vibrated against his leg, and he answered it with the kind of casual posture that suggested he was taking a normal business call. Chen. "We've got an update on Tommy Marconi's location." Agent Chen's voice was crisp despite the background noise of what sounded like a federal command center. Denver PD found the vehicle he was picked up in abandoned outside a storage facility on the south side of town. The facility manager remembers renting a unit to someone matching Tommy's description 3 days ago. He paid cash for 6 months in advance. Vincent felt his stomach drop. 3 days meant Tommy had been planning this approach for longer than anyone had realized. It meant he had resources, preparation time, and probably weapons stored somewhere that law enforcement couldn't touch without a warrant. What was in the unit? We don't know yet. Judge Morrison is reviewing our warrant request, but that could take hours. What we do know is that the facility has security cameras, and Tommy was there again this afternoon, about 2 hours after his ankle monitor went dark. Vincent watched a group of teenagers walk past their table, laughing about something on one of their phones, completely oblivious to the federal manhunt unfolding around them. Their innocence felt like something from another planet, a place where the most dangerous thing they might encounter was a pop quiz in algebra.
Chemistry class. Agent Chen, Vincent said carefully. I need to know exactly how compromised my identity is. My wife is asking questions I don't have answers for, and my kids deserve to know what they're dealing with. Vincent, your cover held for 23 years because you were completely off the grid. No contact with anyone from your previous life, no visits to Boston, no digital footprint that connected Vincent Torrino, the accountant, with Vincent Torrino, the witness. But the moment this trial was announced, your father's people started working backwards from everything they knew about Subject 17's testimony. Maria looked up sharply at the mention of Subject 17, her paralegal instincts picking up on legal terminology that carried more weight than Vincent's careful explanations had suggested. She mouthed the words, "We'll talk," with an expression that promised a conversation Vincent wasn't looking forward to. How much do they know? Vincent asked. They know Subject 17 was 17 years old at the time of testimony, which narrows the field considerably. They know the witness had detailed knowledge of Frank Torrino's daily operations, which suggest family or very close associates. And they know the witness disappeared completely from Boston after the trial, which means federal protection. Vincent closed his eyes, calculating the mathematics of exposure. Boston's North End wasn't that large a community, and his father's inner circle had been relatively small. A 17-year-old with intimate knowledge of daily operations could only be a handful of people, and most of them were either dead or still living in the old neighborhood. So they've narrowed it down to me and maybe 2 other possibilities. Actually, Vincent, they've narrowed it down to just you. The other potential witnesses from that time period have been accounted for. One died in a car accident in 2003. The other is serving life in Attica for armed robbery. You're the only one who fits the profile and disappeared at the right time. The food court suddenly felt less secure, the crowds less protective. Vincent found himself scanning faces more carefully, looking for anyone who seemed too interested in their table or too familiar from his buried memories. Which means my father knows exactly who testified against him. Which means he's known for years, probably since his attorneys started preparing for appeal. Vincent, the only reason you've been saved this long is that Frank has been locked up and his organization has been scattered. But if this trial goes badly, if there's
any chance he might get out on appeal or technicality, you and your family become immediate targets. Vincent hung up the phone and looked at his family, really looked at them, trying to see them the way strangers might. Maria's professional wardrobe and precise movements marked her as educated, probably middle management or professional services. Sophie's mix of confidence and teenage awkwardness suggested private school and college prep courses. Marcus's expensive sneakers and casual assumption of safety spoke to a childhood without real hardship. They were exactly the kind of people who would never survive what was coming if Vincent couldn't find a way to protect them. "That was your handler from witness protection," Maria said quietly. It wasn't a question. Vincent nodded, not bothering to deny what her legal training had already figured out. "Her name is Agent Sarah Chen. She's been my contact since 1999. "Since 1999, Maria repeated slowly. 2 years before we got married. Which means you've been reporting to federal agents our entire marriage and you never told me." Sophie looked between her parents with growing alarm. "Mom, what does that mean? Are we in some kind of government program now?" "It means your father has been living a double life for longer than you've been alive," Maria said, her voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that Vincent found more frightening than shouting. "It means that every major decision we've made as a family, every
place we've lived, every job opportunity we've considered, has been influenced by information he never shared with me." Vincent wanted to defend himself, to explain that his secrecy had been about protection rather than deception, but he could see that Maria was working through the implications with the methodical thoroughness she brought to legal research, and those implications were damning. "The house in Denver," she continued, her voice getting quieter but more intense. "You insisted we buy the house in Denver, even though I had a better job offer in Portland. You said Denver felt right, that it was a good place to raise kids." "Denver was safer," Vincent admitted. "Fewer connections to organized crime families, better federal law enforcement presence, easier to monitor and protect." Marcus dropped his French fry and stared at his father with the kind of accusatory expression that only teenagers could perfect. "You chose where we lived based on how easy it would be for the FBI to protect us, without asking Mom what she wanted?" "I was protecting all of you," Vincent said, but the words sounded increasingly hollow each time he repeated them. "You were making decisions for all of us," Maria corrected, "without our knowledge or consent. That's not protection, Vincent. That's control." Before Vincent could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message from a number he didn't recognize. The message was short and made his blood freeze. "Gino's restaurant sends their regards. Corner booth tomorrow, 8 p.m. Come alone, or Maria gets to plan 2 funerals instead of 1. Vincent's hands started shaking as he read the message, and Maria immediately noticed the change in his expression. "What is it?" Vincent showed her the phone, watching her face go pale as she read the words. Sophie leaned over to look, and her sharp intake of breath drew Marcus's attention. Within seconds, all 4 of them were staring at the screen, confronted with evidence that their crisis had escalated from emotional to potentially lethal. "Gino's restaurant," Maria said slowly. "That's from the photograph, isn't it? The place where you and your father were standing." Vincent nodded, his throat too tight for words. Gino's had been his father's headquarters, the place where business was conducted and problems were solved with permanent finality. The fact that someone was referencing it meant they understood exactly who they were dealing with and what Vincent's testimony had cost the organization. "Dad," Sophie's voice was very small, "who would know to threaten Mom specifically? How do they know her name?" The question hit Vincent like a physical blow, because it revealed the depth of his failure to protect his family. Someone had done enough research to identify not just Vincent's location, but the names and vulnerabilities of everyone he cared about. They had studied his family the way a military strategist might study an enemy position, looking for the most effective points of attack. "They've been watching us," Vincent said quietly. Probably for weeks, maybe months. Learning our routines, our relationships, our weaknesses. Marcus was staring at the message with the kind of intense focus he usually reserved for video games. But this doesn't make sense. If they wanted to hurt us, why give warning? Why not just do whatever they're planning to do? Vincent looked at his son with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Marcus was thinking like a strategist, trying to understand the psychology of the threat they were facing. It was the exact kind of analytical thinking that might keep him alive. But it was also the kind of thinking no 16-year-old should need to develop. Because they don't just want to hurt us, Vincent explained. They want me to suffer first. They want me to know that my choice to testify cost my family everything, just like it cost their organization everything. Maria was studying the message with her legal mind, parsing each word for meaning and implication. Vincent, this sounds like someone who knows you personally, someone who understands how your mind works, how you'll react to specific
threats. Vincent felt a chill of recognition wash over him as he reread the message. The reference to Gino's restaurant was obvious, but the phrasing about Maria planning funerals carried a particular kind of cruelty that he associated with one specific person from his past. "It's not Tommy Morcone," he said slowly. "Tommy was always direct, brutal, but not particularly creative. This is someone else." "Who?" Sophie asked, though Vincent could see she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Vincent closed his eyes and tried to access memories he had spent decades trying to forget. The inner circle of his father's organization had included several people capable of this kind of psychological warfare, but only one who would know enough about Vincent's family to craft such a personal threat. "Salvatore Benedetto," Vincent said finally. "Sal was my father's strategic advisor, the one who planned operations and managed consequences. He was also the one who executed the man I witnessed being killed." Maria absorbed his information with the grim efficiency of someone who was learning to process information that belonged in a different universe than the one she had been living in. "So, this is someone you knew personally? Someone who probably considered you family before you testified against the organization?" Vincent nodded. "Sal taught me how to play chess when I was 12. He came to my high school graduation. He was supposed to be my father's successor when Frank retired." Vincent paused, remembering the man who had been like an uncle to him before becoming the architect of his nightmares. "He's also the most dangerous person my father ever worked with, because he never let emotion interfere with strategy." The food court around them continued its normal evening rhythm, but Vincent felt like they were sitting in a bubble of danger that separated them from all the ordinary families enjoying ordinary Tuesday evenings. A mother wiped ice cream off her toddler's face at a nearby table. Two elderly men argued good-naturedly about a baseball game. Teenagers flirted awkwardly near the pretzel stand. All of it felt surreal, like watching life through a window from a place where normal rules no longer applied. "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. "Do you meet with him? Do we run? Do we call the FBI?" Vincent looked at his family, really looked at them, trying to see the situation through their eyes. They were asking him to make a decision that would determine whether they lived or died, whether they had a future together or spent the rest of their lives running from shadows. And they were asking him to make that decision with incomplete information and no good options. "We don't do anything," Vincent said carefully. "I handle this myself, and you three go into protective custody until it's resolved." "Absolutely not," Maria said immediately. "We're not splitting up, and you're not making unilateral decisions about our safety anymore. We're going to figure this out together, or we're going to fail together, but we're not doing it separately." Sophie nodded emphatically. "Mom's right. We just found out who you really are, Dad. We're not losing you again because you think you need to protect us from the consequences of your own choices." Vincent felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of control that he had maintained for so long that releasing it felt like learning to breathe differently. His family was offering him something he had never had during his original confrontation with his father's organization, allies who knew the truth and chose to stand with him anyway. "If we do this together," Vincent said slowly, "you need to understand what you're signing up for. Sal Benedetto doesn't make empty threats, and he doesn't leave loose ends. If we start this fight, we have to be prepared to finish it, no matter what that means." Maria reached across the table and took his hand, the first physical contact they had shared since the truth came out.
her wedding ring pressed against his palm, a reminder of promises made and kept and broken and maybe renewed under circumstances neither of them could have imagined.
Then we finish it, she said. But first, you're going to tell us everything. Not the edited version you think we can handle, not the sanitized version that protects our feelings, everything. Because if we're going to survive this, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Vincent squeezed her hand and nodded, feeling the weight of 23 years of secrets beginning to lift from his shoulders. Okay, but not here. We need somewhere more secure, somewhere we can talk without being overheard. The police station? Sophie suggested. Vincent shook his head. Sal has connections everywhere, including law enforcement. We need somewhere public enough to be safe, private enough to talk, and unexpected enough that he wouldn't think to look for us there. Marcus was scanning the food court with the kind of tactical awareness that impressed and worried Vincent in equal measure. What about the 24-hour Walmart on the east side? Lots of people, security cameras everywhere, and who would expect a family planning strategy against the mob in the automotive section? Vincent almost smiled. His son was developing survival instincts that would serve him well in the coming days, but it broke Vincent's heart that Marcus needed those instincts at all. Walmart it is, Vincent said. But first, I need to make one more call. He dialed Agent Chen's number, and she answered before the first ring finished. Vincent, please tell me you're calling from a secure location. Define secure. We're in public, we're mobile, and we just received a direct threat from someone claiming to represent Gino's restaurant. The silence on Chen's end stretched long enough that Vincent wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a tension that he had never heard before. Vincent, Gino's restaurant burned down 15 years ago. The building is a parking lot now. Whoever sent you that message is using it as a code, not a meeting place. Vincent felt the ground shift beneath him as he realized he had misunderstood the nature of the threat. What kind of code? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Vincent, you need to get to the nearest FBI field office immediately. Don't go home, don't stop anywhere else. Just get your family to federal protection right now. What aren't you telling me? Vincent asked, recognizing the tone Chen used when she was managing information rather than sharing it. I'm telling you that Salvatore Benedetto was found dead in his cell at ADX Florence 6 months ago. Whoever sent you that message, it wasn't him. Vincent's phone nearly slipped from his hand as the implications hit him. If Sal was dead, then someone else was orchestrating this campaign against his family. Someone with access to inside information about his father's organization, about the details of Vincent's testimony, about the personal relationships that had defined his childhood in Boston's North End. Then who? Vincent asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. We're working on that, Chen said. But Vincent, the psychological profile of those text messages suggests someone with an intimate knowledge of your family dynamics and a very personal grudge against you specifically. Someone who sees your testimony not just as a betrayal of the organization, but as a betrayal of them personally. Vincent looked around the food court with new eyes, suddenly aware that their pursuer might be someone he would recognize, someone whose face was burned into his memory from childhood. The crowds that had felt protective now felt full of potential threats, familiar faces that might not be coincidental encounters. Agent Chen, Vincent said quietly, I think I know who we're dealing with, and if I'm right, my family is in more danger than any of us realized. Who? Chen asked. Vincent took a deep breath and spoke a name he hadn't said out loud in 24 years. A name that belonged to someone he had loved and trusted and ultimately betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. My brother, Vincent said. My twin brother, Anthony.
The silence that followed felt like the moment before an avalanche, when the mountain holds its breath before everything comes crashing down. Vincent had never told Chen about Anthony, had never mentioned him in any of his debriefings or testimony preparation sessions. As far as the federal government knew, Vincent Torrino had been an only child who witnessed a murder and chose justice over family loyalty. But Anthony had been there that night in Gino's restaurant. Anthony had watched the same execution that Vincent had witnessed, and when federal prosecutors offered immunity in exchange for testimony,
Vincent had made a choice that saved his own soul and damned his brother's future. "Vincent," Chen's voice was carefully controlled, "you're going to need to explain that statement in considerable detail, and you're going to need to do it from inside a federal facility, surrounded by agents who can protect your family while we figure out exactly what we're dealing with." Vincent looked at Maria, Sophie, and Marcus, seeing his own recognition reflected in their faces. They had just learned that their crisis was more complicated and more personal than anyone had imagined. The man hunting them wasn't just seeking revenge against a witness who had betrayed his organization. He was seeking revenge against a brother who had saved himself and left Anthony to face the consequences alone. "There's something else," Vincent said to Chen. "Something I should have told you 24 years ago, but I was 17 and scared, and I thought I was protecting him." "What else, Vincent?" Vincent closed his eyes and prepared to reveal the last secret he had been keeping, the one that would explain why this confrontation felt less like a criminal investigation and more like a family tragedy that had been building toward this moment for over 2 decades. "Anthony didn't just witness the murder," Vincent said. "He participated in it. And when I testified against my father's organization, I made sure his name never came up in the federal investigation. I saved myself and left him holding responsibility for crimes we both knew about." The food court noise seemed to fade into background static as Vincent spoke the words that had been burning in his conscience for 24 years. He had told himself that protecting Anthony's identity was an act of brotherly love, but he was beginning to realize that it might have been the cruelest thing he could have done. "Jesus, Vincent." Chen's voice carried a frustration that bordered on anger. "Do you have any idea what kind of position this puts us in? Any idea how this changes our ability to protect you and your family?" Vincent did know, which was why he had never mentioned Anthony's involvement in the first place. A witness who had protected co-conspirators from prosecution was a compromised witness. A witness who had made deals with federal prosecutors while withholding crucial information was a witness whose credibility could be destroyed in court. "I know," Vincent said quietly, "but Chen, if Anthony is the one orchestrating this, then he knows things about me that no one else knows. He knows how I think, how I react under pressure, what I care about most. He knows my family's routines because he's probably been watching us for months, maybe years." "Which gives him tactical advantages that we can't counter without understanding his full capabilities," Chen finished. "Vincent, I need you to get to the Denver field office immediately. We're going to put your family in protective custody while we assess the full scope of this threat." Vincent hung up the phone and faced his family, knowing that he was about to ask them to trust him, despite having just revealed another layer of deception that stretched back to the very foundation of his testimony. "We need to go," he said simply. "To the FBI office?" Maria asked. Vincent nodded. "There's more to this story than I told you earlier. More complications, more history, more people involved than just me and my father." Sophie was studying his face with the kind of intense attention that reminded him of Maria during cross-examination.
"Dad, when you say more people, do you mean more people who might want to hurt us, or more people you've been lying to us about?" The question was fair, and Vincent knew he deserved the suspicion in his daughter's voice. "Both," he admitted. "And I know how that sounds. I know it feels like every answer I give you reveals another question I should have answered years ago. But Sophie, Maria, Marcus, I need you to trust me for just a little bit longer." Marcus stood up and started gathering their coats with the kind of efficiency that suggested he was ready to accept whatever came next. "Dad, I don't think any of us has a choice about trusting you right now. We're all in this together, whether we like it or not." As they walked through the mall toward the parking garage, Vincent found himself scanning every face they passed, looking for the features that would be almost identical to his own. Anthony had been his mirror image in childhood, sharing the same dark eyes and stubborn jawline that had marked them both as Frank Torrino's sons. But 24 years of different choices and different consequences had probably carved different lines into Anthony's face, creating a reflection that would be familiar and strange at the same time. The parking garage felt like a concrete tomb, their footsteps echoing off the walls in a rhythm that reminded Vincent of heartbeats under stress. He had parked on the 3rd level, choosing a spot near the elevator where they would have multiple escape routes if necessary. But as they approached his Honda Accord, Vincent realized that tactical thinking and suburban paranoia were very different skills, and he was about to learn whether his 23 years in witness protection had prepared him for the kind of confrontation that was coming. Maria stopped walking abruptly, her hand gripping Vincent's arm with enough force to leave marks. "Vincent, that car. The blue sedan parked 2 spaces behind yours. Is that the same car that was parked across from our house this morning?" Vincent followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. The blue sedan was occupied by a single figure, male, approximately his age, wearing a dark jacket and watching their family with the kind of patient attention that predators displayed while stalking prey. The distance and angle made it impossible to see the driver's face clearly, but something about his posture triggered recognition that Vincent felt in his bones. "Get behind the concrete pillar," Vincent said quietly, guiding his family toward cover while keeping his eyes on the sedan. "Stay low, stay quiet, and if I tell you to run, you run toward the elevator and don't look back." "Dad," Sophie whispered, "is that him? Is that your brother?" Vincent studied the figure in the car, trying to reconcile his childhood memories with the man who had apparently been watching his family for months. The driver's hands were resting on the steering wheel in a casual posture that suggested patience and confidence. His head was turned in their direction, but he made no effort to hide his surveillance or to approach their position. "I don't know," Vincent admitted, "but whoever it is, they want us to know they're watching. This isn't an ambush. It's a message." The driver of the sedan suddenly reached for something on the passenger seat, and Vincent's muscles tensed for action. But instead of a weapon, the man held up a cell phone, and Vincent's pocket buzzed with an incoming call from the same unknown number that had sent the threatening text message. Vincent looked at his family, seeing his own fear reflected in their faces, and made a decision that went against every instinct Agent Chen had trained into him over the past 24 years. He answered the phone. "Hello, Vinny." The voice on the other end was familiar and strange at the same time, carrying echoes of childhood conversations and adult consequences. "You look good. Suburban life agrees with you." Vincent felt 24 years of careful emotional control cracking like ice in spring. The voice belonged to Anthony, but it carried tones of bitterness and cold amusement that the brother he remembered
Never possessed. "Anthony," Vincent said, the name feeling foreign in his mouth after so many years of silence. "You remember me? I wasn't sure you would. After all these years of pretending I never existed." Vincent looked at Maria, Sophie, and Marcus huddled behind the concrete pillar, their faces pale with fear and confusion. They were listening to one half of a conversation that would determine whether they lived or died, and they were depending on him to navigate a relationship that had been severed by choices he made when he was barely older than Marcus was now. "What do you want, Anthony?" The laugh that came through the phone carried no warmth, only the sound of someone who had nursed 24 years of resentment into something that resembled hatred. "What do I want? I want my baby brother to explain why he saved himself and left me to clean up the mess we both made." Vincent closed his eyes, remembering the night that had changed everything. He and Anthony had been working in Gino's restaurant, supposedly learning the family business, when they witnessed Sal Benedetto
execute a man who had refused to pay protection money. Vincent had been horrified by the casual brutality of it. Anthony had helped dispose of the body. "You made your own choices that night," Vincent said quietly. "I made the choices that kept our family together," Anthony corrected. "I made the choices that honored our father and our name and our responsibilities. You made the choice that saved your own ass and destroyed everything else." The pain in Anthony's voice was real, and Vincent realized that his brother had been carrying the weight of that night for 24 years without the benefit of federal protection or psychological counseling or the luxury of starting over in a new place with a clean slate. "Anthony, I was 17 years old. I was scared and confused, and I thought I was doing the right thing." You were 17 years old and you threw away your family to save yourself. Do you have any idea what the last 24 years have been like for me, Vinny? Do you have any idea what it's like to be the son who stayed? The one who had to watch our father's organization crumble because his other son was cooperating with federal prosecutors? Vincent looked at his own children, trying to imagine how he would feel if one of them made choices that destroyed the life he had built for them. The empathy was devastating, but it was also clarifying. Anthony wasn't just seeking revenge against a witness who had betrayed his organization. He was seeking justice against a brother who had abandoned him when loyalty mattered most. "I'm sorry," Vincent said, and meant it completely. "I'm sorry for leaving you behind. I'm sorry for not finding a way to protect you too. I'm sorry for 24 years of silence." "Apologies don't restore what was lost," Anthony replied. "Apologies don't give me back the life I should have had, the family I should have been able to build, the future that was destroyed when you chose federal protection over family loyalty." Vincent felt Maria's hand on his arm, steadying him as the conversation moved toward whatever conclusion Anthony had planned. "Then what will? What do you need from me to make this right?" The silence that followed stretched long enough for Vincent to wonder if the call had been disconnected. When Anthony finally spoke, his voice carried a finality that made Vincent's blood freeze. "I need you to understand what it feels like to lose everything because someone you trust makes a choice that destroys your life. I need you to watch your family pay the price for your betrayal the same way I watched our family pay the price for your testimony." Vincent felt the world narrow to a single point of focus, the voice of his brother delivering a death sentence disguised as justice. "Anthony, my family had nothing to do with what happened between us. Whatever you need to settle with me, leave them out of it. The way you left me out of your decision to cooperate with federal prosecutors?" Anthony's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "The way you left me out of your
New life in Denver, your successful career, your beautiful family that gets to exist because mine was destroyed?" Vincent realized that negotiation wasn't possible, that Anthony had spent too many years planning this confrontation to be deterred by appeals to mercy or brotherhood. The only thing that might save his family was tactical thinking, and Vincent's suburban instincts were no match for whatever skills Anthony had developed during 24 years of criminal life. "What do you want me to do?" Vincent asked. "I want you to choose," Anthony said. "Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, the parking lot of the old Gino's restaurant site in Boston. Come alone, come unarmed, and maybe your family gets to continue their normal suburban life while you and I settle what should have been settled 24 years ago." Vincent felt the trap closing around him, designed with intimate knowledge of his personality and his priorities. Anthony knew that Vincent would sacrifice himself to protect Maria, Sophie, and Marcus. He also knew that Vincent would recognize the impossibility of running forever from someone with Anthony's resources and connections. "And if I don't come? Then I start with your wife's law firm, then your daughter's school, then your son's basketball team. I work my way through everyone you care about until you realize that the only way to stop me is to give me what I want." The phone went dead,
and Vincent stood in the parking garage holding a silent device, surrounded by his family, and facing a choice that would echo the decision he had made 24 years earlier. Once again, he could save himself at a cost to the people he loved most, or he could sacrifice himself to protect them, completing a circle of justice that Anthony had been drawing for over 2 decades. Maria stepped out from behind the concrete pillar and took the phone from his hand, studying his face with the careful attention she brought to complicated legal problems. "That was him, wasn't it? Your brother?" Vincent nodded, unable to trust his voice. "And he wants you to meet him in Boston tomorrow night?" Vincent nodded again. Sophie moved to stand beside her mother, and Marcus flanked Vincent's other side, creating a family formation that felt like preparation for battle. "Dad," Sophie said quietly, "what happens if you go?" Vincent looked at his daughter, seeing Maria's intelligence combined with his own stubborn determination. "I don't know, sweetheart. But what happens if I don't go is worse." Marcus was studying the blue sedan, which remained parked in the same position, with Anthony still visible behind the wheel. "He's not moving. He's just sitting there, watching us figure out what to do next." Vincent realized that Anthony was giving them time to process the ultimatum, confident that the outcome was inevitable. It was a display of control that demonstrated just how thoroughly he had planned this confrontation, how certain he was that Vincent would make the choice Anthony wanted him to make. "We need to get to the FBI office. Agent Chen needs to know about Anthony, about the ultimatum, about everything." "And then what?" Maria asked. "Do we let federal agents make decisions about our family's future the same way you've been making them for the past 25 years? The question hit Vincent like a physical blow, because it revealed the fundamental flaw in his approach to protecting his family. He had been making unilateral decisions about their safety, their future, their right to know the truth about their own lives. Even now, faced with Anthony's ultimatum, his first instinct was to hand control over to federal authorities rather than trusting his family to participate in decisions that would determine their fate. "No," Vincent said slowly. "We figure this out together. All of us. But we figure it out from inside federal protection, where Anthony can't use you as leverage against me." Maria studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay. But Vincent, when we get to that FBI office, you're going to tell them everything. Not the edited version. Not the version
That protects your image or minimizes your mistakes. Everything." Vincent looked at his family, standing together in a parking garage, facing a crisis that would either destroy them or forge them into something stronger than they had been before. For the first time in 24 years, he was going to trust other people with the complete truth about his past, his choices, and his consequences. "Everything," he agreed. As they walked toward their car, Vincent noticed that the blue sedan's engine had started, and Anthony was preparing to follow them wherever they went next. The surveillance was no longer covert, no longer designed to gather information without being detected. Anthony wanted them to know he was watching, wanted them to feel the pressure of his presence as they tried to figure out how to survive the trap he had spent 24 years constructing. But as Vincent opened the car door for Maria, he realized that something had changed in the dynamic between him and his family. They were no longer asking him to protect them from information they couldn't handle. They were asking him to trust them with the truth so they could protect each other from consequences they would face together. It was a lesson that had taken him 24 years to learn, and he hoped it wasn't too late to put it into practice. The Denver FBI field office felt like a fortress designed by someone who understood that paranoia was sometimes a survival skill. Vincent sat across from Agent Chen in a windowless conference room, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across a table covered with files, photographs, and transcripts that documented 24 years of carefully maintained lies. Maria had positioned herself where she could see both Vincent and Chen, her paralegal instincts alert to every nuance of federal procedure.
Sophie and Marcus occupied chairs along the wall, their teenage restlessness replaced by the kind of focused attention that crisis demanded. Agent Chen spread a series of surveillance photographs across the table, each one showing Anthony Torrino in various locations around Denver over the past 6 months. Outside Sophie's high school, in the parking lot of Maria's law firm, sitting 3 tables away from their family at a restaurant they had visited for Marcus's birthday. The systematic nature of the surveillance was chilling, but what made Vincent's hands shake was the realization that Anthony had been close enough to hurt his family dozens of times and had chosen not to. He's been planning this confrontation for months, Chen said, her voice carrying the kind of professional detachment that came from years of studying criminal behavior. The psychological profile suggests someone with exceptional patience and a very specific endgame in mind. He's not interested in immediate revenge, Vincent. He wants you to understand the full scope of what you cost him before he collects what he believes you owe him. Maria studied the photographs with the methodical attention she brought to legal discovery, noting details that others might miss. Agent Chen, these images show someone who had multiple opportunities to approach our family directly, but he chose to maintain surveillance instead. That suggests he's waiting for something specific, not just seeking random opportunities for revenge. Chen nodded approvingly. Your wife is correct. Anthony Torrino has been building toward tomorrow night's confrontation for years, probably since the moment he learned about the new trial. This isn't spontaneous violence, it's calculated justice from someone who believes he's been wronged in the most fundamental way possible. Vincent looked at the photographs of his brother, trying to reconcile the boy he had known with the man who had spent decades planning his destruction. Anthony's face had acquired lines that spoke of hard living and harder choices, but his eyes carried the same intensity that Vincent remembered from childhood. They had been mirror images once, identical twins who finished each other's sentences and shared each other's dreams. Now they were adversaries, separated by decades of suspicion, resentment, and blame.
Choices that neither of them could undo. Agent Chen, Sophie said quietly, if Anthony has been watching us for months, why didn't any of your people notice? Isn't the witness protection program supposed to include monitoring for exactly this kind of threat? The question was fair and devastating, and Vincent watched Chen struggle with an answer that wouldn't reveal the full extent of federal law enforcement's limitations. Sophie, the witness protection program is designed to hide people, not to provide ongoing security. Your father's cover held for 23 years because he followed protocol and stayed completely disconnected from his previous life. But the moment this trial was announced, every assumption about his safety became invalid. Marcus was studying a surveillance photo that showed Anthony sitting in his car outside their house, close enough to see into their kitchen windows. He was watching us eat dinner. He was watching our family be normal while he planned how to destroy us. Vincent felt the weight of his son's accusation because it highlighted the fundamental unfairness of a situation that Marcus had done nothing to create. His children were paying the price for decisions Vincent had made before they were born, consequences of a choice between justice and family loyalty that had seemed clear at 17 but felt impossibly complicated at 52. Marcus, your father made the right choice 24 years ago, Chen said firmly. He chose to testify against people who were committing serious crimes, people who were using violence to control their community. The fact that one of those people was his father doesn't make the choice wrong. But it does make it complicated, Maria added, her legal mind working through the ethical implications. Vincent chose justice over family loyalty, which was the right thing to do. But he also chose to protect Anthony from prosecution, which might have been the wrong thing to do. And then he chose to disappear completely, leaving Anthony to face consequences alone, which definitely feels like the wrong thing to do. Vincent looked at his wife, seeing the woman who had fallen in love with a man who didn't exist, who had built a marriage on a foundation of half-truths and careful omissions. Maria, I was 17 years old. I was trying to do the right thing in a situation where there was no clear right thing to do. I understand that, Maria replied. What I don't understand is why you never told me the truth about Anthony. Why you let me believe you were an only child. Why you never gave me the chance to help you carry the weight of that decision. The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications about trust and partnership and the kind of honesty that marriage is required to survive.
Vincent had protected Maria from the truth about Anthony for the same reason he had protected her from everything else about his past, but looking at her now, he realized that his protection had been another form of control. Chen cleared her throat, drawing attention back to the tactical situation they were facing. We need to make a decision about tomorrow night. Vincent, we can't let you meet Anthony alone, but we also can't ignore his ultimatum without putting your family at risk. Vincent studied the photographs again, focusing on Anthony's body language and positioning. His brother had chosen surveillance locations that provided clear sight lines and multiple escape routes, demonstrating tactical awareness that went beyond what Vincent would have expected from someone whose criminal experience was limited to Frank Torrino's organization. Agent Chen, where has Anthony been for the past 24 years? What has he been doing since I testified? Chen opened a thick file and spread additional documents across the table. Anthony Torrino has been busy. After your father's organization collapsed, he spent 5 years in federal prison for money laundering and racketeering. When he got out, he moved to Chicago and built his own operation. Smaller than your father's, but more sophisticated. He's been arrested 4 times, but
Convicted only once, which suggests he learned from Frank's mistakes. Vincent felt his stomach drop as he processed the implications. Anthony hadn't just been nursing resentment for 24 years. He had been building skills and resources that made him far more dangerous than the angry brother Vincent had imagined. So, he's not just seeking personal revenge, Vincent said slowly. He's a career criminal with his own organization, his own resources, his own reasons for wanting me eliminated that go beyond family drama. Exactly, Chen replied. Anthony sees your testimony as the foundation of his life's failures, but he also sees your elimination as a business necessity. As long as you're alive and willing to testify, you represent a threat to anyone associated with Frank Torrino's old organization. Sophie had been quietly studying the surveillance photographs, and now she looked up with an expression that reminded Vincent uncomfortably of himself at her age. Agent Chen, all of these pictures show Anthony alone. No associates, no backup, no indication that he's working with other people. Why would he handle something this important by himself? Chen's expression shifted slightly, acknowledging that Vincent's daughter had identified something significant. That's an excellent question, Sophie. Most criminal operations of this magnitude involve multiple people, but Anthony appears to be operating solo. Which suggests this is personal rather than professional, Maria added, which means he's not necessarily thinking clearly, not making decisions based on tactical advantage or criminal logic. Vincent realized that his family was conducting a better analysis of the threat they faced than most federal task forces would manage, and it made him proud and terrified in equal measure. They were demonstrating intelligence and resilience that would serve them well in the confrontation ahead, but they were also revealing that they understood the stakes better than he had given them credit for. There's something else, Vincent said quietly. Anthony chose the parking lot of the old Gino's restaurant site for our meeting. That location is symbolic, but it's also tactical. It's where our father's organization was headquartered, where we learned the family business, where everything started. Chen nodded grimly. We've been analyzing that choice. The location provides Anthony with psychological advantages, but it also limits his escape routes and exposes him to federal surveillance. It's the choice of someone who's more interested in the symbolism of the confrontation than in tactical superiority. Marcus was studying a map of Boston that Chen had spread across the table, tracing routes and calculating distances with the kind of focus he usually reserved for video games. Dad, if Anthony wanted to hurt us, he could have done it any time during the past 6 months. The fact that he's giving you this ultimatum suggests he wants something more than just revenge. Vincent looked at his son, amazed by the tactical thinking Marcus was displaying under pressure. What do you think he wants? Marcus studied the surveillance photographs again, looking for patterns and motivations that adults might miss. I think he wants you to understand what it felt like to be abandoned. I think he wants you to experience the choice he had to make 24 years ago when you disappeared and left him to face everything alone. The insight was devastating in its accuracy, and Vincent realized that his 16-year-old son had identified the psychological core of Anthony's campaign against their family. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.